So let's talk about token replacement in routing. So before we proceed, let me tell you one thing that this token replacement is a new functionality, or we can say a new feature available in ASP.NET Core that was not available in .NET Framework or MVC, right? So let's get into the picture and let's get started. Why we go for token replacement? So basically, token replacement is a way we can replace the values of controller and action method dynamically. For example, let's say I want to access this particular action method or resource by the name of this controller and by the name of this action method, right? So let's define token replacement over here for this action method. Let's say I'm going to define token replacement for this resource. So let's define for defining routing URL. So let's define route, and let's say we want to call this resource or this action method by the name of this controller name is, let's say, your value, right? You can see controller name values, and the action method name is your get result, right? So uh, so we can call this action method by defining this URL in the by defining this pattern in the URL, right? So it will basically call this action method. But let's say for using the functionality of token replacement, so I need to define in the square bracket, let's say controller, right? And after this we need to define action method in square bracket. So we need to define action, right? So now this way, at runtime we can call this particular resource or this particular action method by defining the name of the controller and the action method. So let's look into the picture and let's define same thing for the next action method, let's say for this resource, right? So now we can access this resource and this resource by defining the controller name and action method name for these two different resources. So let's save the changes and run the application. Our application has been built successfully. Now for calling this particular resource, let's say this action method we want to call, so we will define simply, you can see, value, the controller name, and then we need to define the action method. For calling this action method, we need to define the action method name, and data is get result, right? Pressing the enter, and you can see we are getting the desired output hello from get result method, the same we are expecting, right? Now let's say we want to call this time this resource get customer account. So the same pattern we have to define. We need to define first of all controller name. Controller is your values, and after that we need to define your action method name, right? So we need to define get customer account, right? Now pressing the enter, and you can see we are getting the expected output from this resource hello id, whatever we are returning from this method, right? So if you see, there is no any ambiguity occur, right? We have defined the similar routing URL for this resource also and for this, but if you see, the action method name is different, right? So what is happening behind the scene with the concept of token replacement at runtime, when we are calling this particular resource at runtime, this value will get replaced with the controller name, and this value will get replaced with the action method name, right? So for this action method, we are having this action name, and for this action method, we are having this this action name, right? So no ambiguity will occur. Getting my point? So this is the way how we can how we can use the concept of token replacement in routing, right? Let me stop the application, and also let me tell you one more thing. If you are using the concept of area in your application, then you can pass area over here, right? Basically we can use the concept of area over here in token replacement. Let's right? Let's say if you want to change the order of this particular pattern, we can also do it. So let's say over here we want to pass action, and after this we want to pass the controller name, right? Similarly, we can apply this to the this resource also, right? Now at runtime, what will happen for calling this particular resource? Firstly, we need to pass the action method name, and then we need to pass the controller name. And at runtime, automatically it will be replaced by the action name, and it will got replaced by controller name. So it basically depends what kind of requirements do we have in our project, and accordingly we can define the templates for our particular controller and action method, right? So let's save the changes and run the application and see this thing also in the picture when we have changed the order of this, right? Routing URL. So let's see it's working or not. Our application has been built successfully, as you can see. And now for accessing this particular resource, we need to pass. Now this time we will pass action name first. That is our get result, right? Then we need to pass our controller name. That is your values. Now we can see we are getting the output expected output from this resource hello from get result method, right? And let's say for calling this resource we need to pass action method first of all. So over here we will write get customer account, right? And the controller name is same. Pressing enter, as you can see we are getting the expected output hello id from this particular resource, right? So this is how we can basically use the concept of token replacement in our web application, right? So depending on our need in the project, we can define the concept of token replacement in the routing URL.